The year 722, 300 starving Spanish outcasts, hiding in a cave, faced an Islamic army of over 100,000 elite warriors. By sunset, the cave dwellers would be victorious, the massive army would be utterly destroyed, and the 800-year Reconquista of Spain would begin with this impossible moment. Think about this ratio: 1 defender for every 333 attackers. The fate of Christianity in Europe hung by a thread in a remote Spanish cave. By the end of this video, you'll understand how physics, faith, and pure desperation combined to create the most lopsided victory in medieval warfare. You'll discover the secret weapon that turned mountain stones into guided missiles. You'll learn why the Muslim commander's fatal mistake doomed his entire army before the battle even began. And you'll understand how a disgraced nobleman's cave hideout became Christianity's last stand in Western Europe. Picture this: water dripping on limestone, the smell of fear and determination thick in the air. These weren't knights in shining armor. They were shepherds, fugitives, and broken nobles who had lost everything. Their leader, Pelagius, was a wanted man with a price on his head that could buy a small town. Now imagine the approaching army, dust clouds visible for miles, drums echoing through valleys like thunder, battle-hardened veterans who had conquered from India to France, armed with Damascus steel and composite bows that could kill at 300 yards. How did Pelagius know the Muslims were coming to this exact location? What made seasoned Muslim generals ignore basic military tactics they'd used to conquer half the known world? And here's the strangest part. Why did local Spanish Muslims join the Christian defenders? How could elite cavalry be defeated by farmers with rocks? How did word of this tiny skirmish spread across all of Europe within weeks? And what dark secret from Pelagius' past made him choose death over surrender? To understand how David defeated Goliath with geography instead of a sling, we need to go back 11 years to when Islamic armies first crossed into Spain. If you're fascinated by history's greatest underdog victories and the battles that changed the world, hit that like button and subscribe for more epic war content. Ring the bell so you never miss our deep dives into history's most incredible military moments. Now, let me transport you back to 8th century Spain. The year 711 changed everything. In just 2 years, the mighty Visigothic kingdom of Spain, which had stood for 3 centuries, crumbled like sand. Islamic armies swept across the Iberian Peninsula with stunning speed, crushing every force sent against them. City after city fell. Toledo, the great capital, surrendered without a siege. The last Visigothic king died in battle, his kingdom dying with him. But here's where it gets insane. Among the palace guards who survived was a man named Pelagius, the exile. Once bodyguard to kings, now he was nothing but an outlaw hiding in the mountains. The Muslims had marked him for death, not for what he'd done, but for what he represented, the old order that refused to die. Leading the Islamic forces in northern Spain was Al-Qama, nicknamed the Avalanche. This man had never lost a battle. He'd crushed armies 10 times his size through sheer tactical brilliance. Veterans whispered his name with respect. When Al-Qama marched, kingdoms fell. Yet the real power in the north was Munuza, the pragmatic Muslim governor who wanted peace. He understood something Al-Qama did. The mountains of Asturias were different. These weren't the plains of Syria or the deserts of Arabia. These were vertical mazes of stone where conventional warfare meant nothing. The Muslim conquest brought a tribute system. Convert to Islam or pay the tax. Most paid, some converted. But in the mountains of Asturias, Pelagius said, no. This wasn't about money. The tribute was symbolic, affordable even for shepherds. This was about the soul of a continent. You have to understand the geography. Asturias is where Spain runs out of room, pressed between mountains and sea. Valleys so narrow that 20 men could hold off thousands. Peaks so high that clouds lived below their summits. Rivers that could become torrents in minutes. This landscape had never been conquered, not by Romans, not by Visigoths, and Pelagius bet his life it wouldn't fall to Muslims either. What happened next broke every rule of warfare. Pelagius didn't just refuse tribute, He started raiding Muslim tax collectors. Each success brought more followers, shepherds who knew every hidden path, dispossessed nobles with nothing left to lose, former soldiers who remembered how to fight, even some local Muslims who resented Al-Qamar's harsh rule. The religious divide cut deep. This wasn't just about land or gold. Christians saw the Muslim conquest as the apocalypse foretold. Muslims saw Christian resistance as rebellion against God's obvious will. Neither side could back down without betraying everything they believed. When word reached Al-Qamar that a minor noble was causing trouble in worthless mountains, he laughed. These weren't the first rebels he'd faced. He'd crushed Berber revolts in Africa, Persian holdouts in the east. What could shepherd rebels do against professional soldiers? But wait, Munuza knew better. He'd governed these mountains for years. He sent warnings to Al-Qamar. The mountains here aren't like other places. The people are different. Send negotiators, not armies. But Al-Qamar had orders from Damascus. Crush all resistance. Make examples. Show that rebellion meant death. When Al-Qamar received orders to crush the rebellion, he laughed. He would soon learn that mountain wars follow different rules. In the valleys of Asturias, numbers meant nothing. Experience meant nothing. Only the mountains mattered, and the mountains had already chosen their side. The army Al-Qamar assembled would make any commander confident. 10,000 confirmed elite cavalry chronicles would later claim 124,000 total, but even the conservative number was overwhelming. These weren't conscripts or levies. These were professional soldiers, each man a veteran of multiple campaigns. Their equipment alone told the story of an empire. Damascus steel swords that could cut through iron, composite bows with a 300-yard killing range, technology stolen from the steppes and perfected in Syrian workshops, scale armor that turned aside most weapons while allowing movement. The supply train stretched back 5 miles: ammunition, food, siege equipment, everything needed to sustain a campaign. These men had conquered from India to France. They'd broken the Sassanid Persian Empire, crushed the Byzantines in Syria, swept across North Africa like a storm. They'd adapted to every terrain, every enemy. Desert warfare, mountain campaigns, siegecraft. There was nothing they hadn't mastered. But Pelagius had one advantage Al-Qamar couldn't see from his maps and reports. His forces numbered just 300 men who owned nothing but their hatred. Look at their weapons-hunting bows passed down through generations, with maybe 50 arrows per man. Shepherd slings, the kind used to drive off wolves. Rusted Visigothic swords salvaged from old battlefields. Wooden shields that would splinter under a real blow. Some men had nothing but sharpened farm tools. Yet these men possessed something priceless: knowledge. Every cave in these mountains, every goat path invisible to lowlander eyes, every loose stone that could trigger a slide. They knew which valleys flooded in rain, which passes became wind tunnels, where echoes could make 10 men sound like 100. This was their landscape, carved into their souls through generations. Remember this number. For every defender, 33 attackers would enter those mountain passes. The approach march built tension day by day. Al-Qamar's army moved north from Leon, confident and organized. Day 1, perfect Roman roads, singing soldiers, high morale. Day 2, roads became paths, songs became muttered complaints about the narrowing valleys. Day 3, paths became goat tracks, complaints became nervous silence. Then the rains came, and everything changed. Mountain rain isn't like plains rain. It turns paths into torrents, solid ground into sliding mud. Armor became a curse, weighing men down. Horses slipped and fell, taking riders into ravines. The supply train bogged down, separating from the fighting units. What should have been a 3-day march stretched to 10 days of misery. But here's the detail that changes everything. Pelagius's men were watching. They knew exactly where the Muslims were. Every single day. They left messages. Mutilated Muslim scout bodies arranged to be found at dawn. Arrows fired from impossible positions, killing officers. Rock slides that seemed natural, but happened too precisely to be coincidence. Psychological warfare at its most primitive and effective. By the time Al-Qamar's force approached Covadonga, They were exhausted, paranoid, and strung out in a valley that kept getting narrower. The drums that had announced their power now echoed off canyon walls, becoming a sound of doom. The cave selection wasn't random, it was chosen for acoustics and angles. The cave of Covadonga sat like a fortress designed by nature, approached by a single narrow path with a killing drop on one side and a cliff face on the other. The cave mouth itself, 40 feet up the cliff face, accessible only by scrambling up wet limestone while exposed to missiles from above. Inside, natural chambers that could hold hundreds. Fresh water from underground springs. Multiple exits known only to locals. But most importantly, the acoustic properties war cries from inside were amplified and directed down the valley, making defenders sound like thousands. And then came the sound that haunted survivors forever: Christian war songs echoing from that cave mouth, growing louder as Muslim forces approached. Ancient Visigothic battle hymns mixed with local mountain calls, creating a wall of sound that seemed to come from the rock itself. As Alcama studied the approach, his Berber mountain troops warned him. These weren't their mountains, but they recognized a trap. The valley was a funnel, the cave was bait. This whole thing screamed ambush, but Alcama had orders and a reputation. No rabble in a cave would make him retreat. As dawn broke on the day of battle, both commanders made choices that would echo for 8 centuries. Dawn revealed a valley transformed into a weapon. Morning mist clung to the slopes, hiding the upper reaches where Pelagios' men waited. The Muslim army, magnificent on open ground, found itself compressed by geography into a serpent of steel and flesh, winding through an ever-narrowing passage. Picture yourself in that column. You start at the valley mouth, where 2,000 men can stand abreast. March forward for a mile, and it's down to 200. Another half mile, and barely 20 men can stand shoulder to shoulder. The final approach to the cave, single file, with death drops on one side and sheer cliff on the other. This is where Alcama made his fatal error. Any competent general would recognize this as a killing ground and refuse engagement. But Alcama saw only rebels in a cave, not the trap nature had built. His pride demanded these peasants face justice. He ordered the advance. First contact came from shadows. Arrows launched from positions impossible to spot, finding gaps in armor with suspicious accuracy. Officers fell first, men marked by their better equipment and confident bearing. Each death forced a pause, a bunching up of forces that made them better targets. What happened next defied every rule of medieval warfare. Instead of retreating to better ground, Alcama responded with overwhelming force. "Send the Berber mountain troops," he commanded. These were his specialists, men who'd grown up in the Atlas Mountains, who should have been able to handle this terrain. The Berbers advanced skillfully, using cover, moving in bounds. They reached the base of the cliff below the cave. That's when they heard it. Pelagios' voice, amplified by cave acoustics, delivering a speech that chroniclers would record in a dozen versions. Men of Asturias, today we stand not just for ourselves but for every Christian in Iberia. Today these valleys will run red with the blood of invaders. Today we restore the kingdom of our fathers. Trust in Christ and in your strong right arms. Death to the enemies of God. The Muslim herald stepped forward with the ultimatum: submit, convert, or die. Standard terms that had worked across 3 continents. The response came not in words but in action. An arrow that took the herald through the throat, followed by a shower of stones that sent the Berber vanguard scrambling for cover. Now you understand why Alcama's generals had begged him to avoid this fight, but it was too late to withdraw without losing face. The first charge involved 1,000 men compressed into space meant for 50. Imagine the physics-armored soldiers pressed together so tightly they couldn't raise weapons properly. Those in front couldn't retreat, those behind couldn't stop pushing forward. The mass of humanity became its own enemy. And this is where it gets absolutely brutal. As the Muslim forces bunched up below the cave, struggling to deploy in the narrow space, Pelagios' men began their work. Not with swords or spears, but with stones. Not random throwing, these were aimed shots by generations of shepherds who could hit a wolf at 50 yards with a sling stone. Here's where legend and history collide. Christian sources claim the Virgin Mary appeared above the cave, turning Muslim arrows back on their attackers. Muslim sources speak of witchcraft in the mountains. The truth was simpler and more devastating, acoustic warfare combined with perfect defensive terrain. War cries from the cave were amplified by the rock formations, reflected and focused down the valley. To the attacking Muslims, it sounded like thousands of defenders, not hundreds. The psychological effect was immediate. Men at the back of the column, hearing what sounded like a massive army ahead, pushed forward. Men at the front, facing death from above, tried to pull back. The result was compression, panic, chaos. But the mountain itself was about to join the battle. The limestone cliffs above the valley were weathered, fractured, with massive sections held in place by friction and small keystones. The defenders knew exactly which stones to hit to trigger slides. This wasn't random. It was generational knowledge of mountain shepherds turned into a weapon system. The stone rain began in earnest. Not pebbles or random rocks, but selected limestone chunks weighing 20 to 50 pounds, dropped from 300 feet up. At that height, even a small stone becomes deadly. Larger ones could crush through any armor, splitting helmets, shattering shields, breaking bones through mail. What the Muslim scouts saw made them stop in their tracks, their own forces being compressed into a killing zone where martial skill meant nothing, where expensive armor became a liability, dragging men down, where elite cavalry had to dismount and become awkward infantry, where every advantage of training, equipment, and numbers was neutralized by vertical geography. Al-Qama, watching his vanguard disintegrate, faced a commander's worst nightmare. Advance was impossible. The cave approach could only accommodate small numbers, easily destroyed by defenders. Retreat was becoming difficult as more troops pressed forward into the narrowing valley. Standing still meant death from above. This single decision would cost 50,000 lives. Instead of accepting tactical defeat and withdrawing, Al-Qama ordered a general assault. Every unit was to press forward, overwhelm the defenders through sheer mass. It was a decision born of pride, frustration, and fundamental misunderstanding of mountain warfare. And then, at exactly noon, nature and man combined to create hell on earth. The valley became an anatomy lesson in mass death. As thousands of Muslim soldiers pressed forward into the narrowing approach, physics took command. The compression point, where the valley narrowed to just 20 men wide, became a meat grinder that would haunt military tacticians for centuries. Ahmed from Damascus, veteran of 20 battles, found himself pressed against limestone walls, his sword arm pinned to his side by the mass of his own comrades. He couldn't lift his weapon, couldn't retreat, couldn't even fall when struck. Men died standing up, held vertical by the press of bodies. The physics of mass panic in confined spaces turned elite soldiers into victims. As stones rained from above, instinct demanded retreat. But retreat was impossible. The column had become a single organism, 10,000 men long, capable only of pressing forward into death. Those at the back, unable to see the slaughter ahead, kept pushing. Those at the front, watching comrades crushed by falling rocks, tried desperately to turn back. But then came the first reversal. Pelagius himself led a countercharge from the cave. Just 30 men, but 30 men attacking downhill into a packed mass that couldn't maneuver. They didn't need to be skilled warriors. They just had to push, stab downward, and let gravity and compression do the killing. The front ranks of Muslims, already dying from stones, now faced steel from the front while being pushed by their own forces from behind. In 10 minutes, 2,000 men became 200. The narrow approach was carpeted with bodies, creating obstacles that made the compression worse. Men climbing over their dead comrades became easier targets. Blood made limestone slick as ice. The killing funnel had become a literal funnel of the dead. What followed was not battle but geographic execution. The limestone ammunition Pelagius' men had gathered wasn't random debris. These were selected stones, tested for weight and balance, stockpiled at specific points along the cliff tops. 50-pound chunks that could be rolled to the edge and tipped over with a wooden lever. Consider what 50 pounds of limestone does when dropped from 300 feet. Impact velocity reaches 60 miles per hour. The kinetic energy is equivalent to a modern artillery shell. Damascus steel meant nothing. The finest armor from Toledo's forges crumpled like parchment. Men weren't just killed, they were pulverized. The sound alone broke spirits. Limestone on steel creates a bell-like ring that echoes through valleys. Multiply that by hundreds of impacts per minute. Add the wet crunch of stones meeting flesh, the screams of the dying amplified by canyon acoustics, and you have a soundscape from hell itself. Survivors spoke of covering their ears, of the noise driving men mad. From his command position, Alcama watched his army disintegrate. His bodyguard formed a shield roof above him, but even that couldn't stop the geology-turned-artillery. He saw his finest units, men who'd broken Byzantine shield walls and Frankish charges, reduced to cowering figures trying to shelter under corpses. Statistical shock tells the story. In the first 10 minutes of the stone storm, Pelagios' 300 men inflicted 2,000 casualties without losing a single defender. The ratio had flipped. Instead of 333 attackers per defender, it was now 7 defenders for every attacker who could actually reach the cave mouth. But wait, the real shock was yet to come. This wasn't even the main attack. This was just the preparation. The few Muslim soldiers who reached the cave mouth found hell's antechamber. The approach required climbing wet limestone while under constant missile fire. Those who made it faced fresh defenders fighting from above, the perfect killing position. Pelagios' personal combat became legend. 3 named opponents fell to his sword: Suleiman the Swift, champion of Cordoba; Hakim ibn Rashid, who'd killed 17 Christians in single combat; and Yusuf al-Dimashqi, whose armor was said to be blessed by holy men. Each duel ended the same way. The attacker, exhausted from the climb, facing a defender who'd done nothing but wait and prepare. Then came the moment historians still debate. Christian sources claim the Virgin Mary appeared above the cave, visible to both armies. Muslim chronicles speak more vaguely of signs and portents that disturbed their men. Whatever the truth, something caused a morale collapse among the attackers. Men who'd faced death across 3 continents suddenly refused to advance. But Alcama's elite guard, his personal 300, wouldn't accept defeat. These were men bound by oath to die before retreating. They formed up for one last assault, shields locked, advancing up the bloody slope in perfect discipline despite the stone storm. They actually reached the cave mouth, pushing back Pelagios' first line. For a moment, it seemed the battle might turn. The Muslim elite were inside the cave entrance, more climbing behind them. Pelagios' men were giving ground. Alcama, seeing success, ordered all reserves forward. The entire Muslim army surged toward the cave. And that's when the mountain took sides. What happened next still defies explanation. Whether by design or divine intervention, the limestone cliffs above the battle chose this moment to fail. The theory of triggered avalanche seems most likely defenders targeting key stones that held back tons of fractured rock, but the timing was so perfect that even modern geologists struggle to explain it. 100,000 tons of rock moving at 60 miles per hour down a 40-degree slope. The physics are simple, nothing survives. The Muslim elite guard at the cave mouth vanished, along with several of Pelagios' own men who'd advanced too far. The main avalanche hit the packed masses in the valley with the force of divine judgment. But God or geology had other plans for the slaughter. The avalanche didn't just kill, it dammed the Deva River that ran along the valley floor. Bodies and boulders created a natural barrier 30 feet high. Water backed up rapidly in the narrow canyon. Men who'd survived stones and avalanche now faced drowning. The Deva Dam lasted just 20 minutes before bursting. When it did, a wall of water carrying thousands of corpses swept down the valley. Muslim reinforcements, moving up to support the attack, met this macabre flash flood head-on. Fresh troops became fresh victims. Yet incredibly, Alcama survived the avalanche. He'd been far enough back to avoid the main slide, protected by the bodies of his own men. Wounded, half-buried, he pulled himself free and tried to rally survivors. That's when the third reversal hit. Pelagios' men, seeing the avalanche had cleared the approach, counterattacked down into the valley. Alcama's death remains disputed. Christian sources claim a shepherd boy killed him with a sling stone. Muslim sources say it was an arrow through the eye slot of his helmet. Others suggest he drowned in the Deva flood. What matters is that the Muslim command structure died with him. 7 generals survived the avalanche. 7 different retreat orders were issued simultaneously. The result was chaos multiplied by terror. Units collided trying to follow contradictory commands. The narrow valley that had compressed them attacking now trapped them retreating. And suddenly, the hunters became the hunted. Local villagers, both Christian and Muslim, who'd hidden during the approach now emerged. 7 years of occupation had built resentments that exploded in 7 hours of revenge. Armed with farm tools, hunting bows, and rocks, they fell on the routing army like wolves. This is the moment that changes everything. These weren't just Christians attacking Muslims. Local Muslims who'd lived peacefully under Visigothic rule joined the assault. They'd suffered under Alcama's harsh taxation and brutal discipline. The battle became not about religion, but about mountain folk against foreign oppression. Statistical shock: 90% casualties in 1 hour. Military historians call it impossible. No pre-modern battle produced such lopsided losses. But this wasn't a battle anymore. It was geology and geography, executing an army that had put itself in an inescapable trap. Pelagios tried to restore order, to take prisoners, to stop the slaughter. His men ignored him. 7 years of Muslim dominance were being repaid in blood. The killing continued until darkness made it impossible to distinguish friend from foe. The Valley of Death became a charnel house. Bodies stacked 10 deep at the narrowest points created dams that turned the battlefield into a series of bloody pools. Armor became anchors, dragging wounded men underwater barely 2 feet deep. The finest cavalry in the Muslim world drowned in their own blood. Those who escaped the valley faced the mountain peasants. Every village, every shepherd's hut, every mountain path had become a killing ground. Local knowledge meant nowhere was safe. Men who'd conquered from the Indus to the Atlantic were hunted down by children who knew every cave and crevice. The physics of rout are merciless. Once panic takes hold in a compressed formation, recovery is impossible. Men trampled their comrades trying to escape. Officers who tried to rally troops were pushed down and crushed. The narrowness that had been a tactical problem became a death sentence. Pelagios' restraint, order to spare those who surrendered, was universally ignored. This wasn't military justice, but mountain justice, older and harsher than any law. Women who'd been violated took their revenge. Children who'd seen fathers killed picked up stones. The professional army that had entered the valley ceased to exist not through battle but through complete annihilation. The final body count defies belief. Conservative estimates place Muslim losses at 50,000. Enthusiastic chronicles claim 124,000. The truth probably lies between perhaps 70,000 men entered those valleys, and fewer than 1,000 escaped. The greatest military disaster in Islamic history until the Mongol invasions, and it happened not through tactics or strategy, but through one commander's prideful refusal to respect the mountains. As the sun set on that blood-soaked valley, nobody yet understood that they had just witnessed the first domino fall in an 800-year war. The Valley of Death presented a scene from Dante's imagination. Bodies stacked 10 deep at the compression points created grotesque monuments to tactical folly. The narrowest section of the approach had become a dam of the dead, forcing the Deva River to carve new channels through banks of corpses. 3 Muslim soldiers survived to tell the tale, 3 out of tens of thousands. They'd lived by hiding under the dead, breathing through gaps in the corpse pile, while Christian peasants methodically checked for survivors. Their accounts, preserved in Cordoba's chronicles, provide our only glimpse from the losing side. The mountains fell, one survivor testified. Allah turned his face from us. The rocks themselves fought for the Christians. Their war cries came from every direction, from the earth and sky. We were not defeated by men but by the land itself. That evening, Pelagius stood among his exhausted men and delivered a speech that would echo through centuries. Today, we have proven that free men in their own land cannot be conquered. Today, we have shown that faith and mountains are stronger than all the armies of the Caliphate. Today, the Reconquista begins. But the victory nearly turned to ash when scouts reported a second Muslim army approaching. Munuza, the pragmatic governor, had mobilized regional forces when he learned of Al-Qama's march. 5,000 fresh troops, moving carefully, learning from the morning's disaster. Pelagius' men were exhausted, low on ammunition, many wounded. What nobody expected was the Muslim governor's next move. Munuza reached the outer valleys, saw the carnage, and made a calculation that would define the next century. He ordered full retreat, not from cowardice, but from wisdom. The mountains had chosen their champion. The cost of conquest would exceed any possible benefit. The news spreading became its own phenomenon. From shepherds' songs to royal courts in 4 weeks, the story grew with each telling. 300 became 30. 10,000 enemy dead became 180,000. By the time word reached Paris, Pelagius had become a new David, anointed by God to hold back the Islamic tide. Christian response across Europe was electric. For 11 years, Christendom had watched Islam's seemingly unstoppable advance. Constantinople besieged, France invaded, Italy threatened. Every victory fed the narrative of divine judgment, of Christianity's failures being punished. Covadonga shattered that narrative. If Spanish shepherds could destroy the Caliphate's armies, then God hadn't abandoned his people. The casualty analysis reveals the truth behind the legend. Real numbers, perhaps 300 defenders versus 20,000 attackers, not the chronicled 180,000. Losses: 5,100 Christians, 15,000, 18,000 Muslims. Still the most lopsided victory in medieval history, achieved not through military genius but through perfect use of terrain. The cave transformation began immediately. From desperate hideout to sacred shrine in a single day, Pelagius' men built the first crude altar where they'd made their stand. Within a year, pilgrims were arriving. Within a decade, the cave had become the spiritual heart of Christian resistance in Iberia. Political aftermath moved swiftly. The surviving Asturian nobles, many who'd hidden during the fighting, now emerged to crown Pelagius at Cangas de Onís. The ceremony was modest. No crown existed, so they used a circlet of mountain flowers. But the symbolism was powerful. Christian kingship had survived in these mountains. The military aftermath established patterns that would define the Reconquista. Munuza ordered a no-go zone around the Asturian mountains. Muslim garrisons pulled back to defensible positions in the plains. The economic cost of mountain warfare against determined defenders simply wasn't worth it. Let the Christians have their rocks and caves. But here's where it gets insane. This withdrawal created a power vacuum that Pelagius exploited brilliantly. Each abandoned Muslim outpost became a Christian stronghold. Each retreating garrison left behind weapons, supplies, even sympathizers. The kingdom of Asturias grew not through conquest but through strategic retreat by its enemies. What happened next broke every rule of post-battle politics. Instead of mass executions or religious persecution, Pelagius declared protection for any Muslim who swore loyalty to Asturias. Local Muslims who joined the battle were rewarded with land. This pragmatism, choosing political stability over religious purity, would make Asturias the seed from which Christian Spain would regrow. The bodies in the valley posed a massive problem. Tens of thousands of corpses in a narrow space, summer heat approaching. Disease could destroy the victors as surely as defeat. Pelagius ordered mass cremations, but the sheer number overwhelmed any attempt at disposal. In the end, they sealed the narrowest part of the valley with stone walls, creating a massive ossuary. The wall of bones stood for 3 centuries before earthquakes finally buried it. The immediate military consequences were seismic. The myth of Muslim invincibility died in that valley. If geography and determination could defeat the Caliphate's best, then reconquest was possible. Within months, Christian resistance sparked across northern Iberia. The Basques rose in their mountains. Galicia expelled its Muslim garrisons. The Pyrenees became a wall of rebellion. The Battle of Covadonga was over, but its echoes would resound for 8 centuries. From this single mountain valley would grow the kingdoms of Leon, Castile, Aragon, all the powers that would eventually unite to drive Islam from Iberia. The Reconquista had begun not with grand strategy, but with desperate men making their stand where the mountains themselves could fight beside them. The Reconquista that began at Covadonga would last 770 years, from 722 to 1492, when the last Muslim ruler surrendered Granada. 8 centuries of warfare sparked by 300 men in a cave. No other battle's echo lasted so long or changed so much. The myth grew with each generation's telling. By the time Alfonso X wrote his chronicles, Pelagius commanded angels, the Virgin Mary personally guided Christian arrows, and 187,000 Muslims died in divine flames. The reality desperate men using terrain intelligently became less important than the symbol. Covadonga proved that the impossible was possible if you fought on ground of your choosing. Military lessons from Covadonga echo through history. Thermopylae taught the same truth: terrain over numbers. Agincourt reinforced it. Technology means nothing in the wrong place. Modern Afghanistan proved it again. Superpowers die in mountains when locals know the ground. Every insurgency studies Covadonga, not for tactics but for the strategic truth. Pick your battlefield and geography becomes your greatest ally. Religious significance transformed a cave into Spain's spiritual heart. The shrine of Covadonga draws millions of pilgrims. They come to see where Christianity's retreat ended and advance began. The cave that sheltered 300 desperate men now shelters the idea that faith and determination can overcome any odds. Here's the detail that changes everything. Covadonga created Spanish national identity. Before 722, there were Visigoths, Romans, Celts, Iberians. After Covadonga, there were Spaniards. The battle created a people by giving them a shared story of resistance, a common enemy, and a sacred starting point. Modern Spain traces its birth to that cave. Modern parallels proliferate. Every insurgency, every resistance movement, every underdog military studies Covadonga. Not for specific tactics, nobody fights with slingstones anymore, but for the principles. Make the enemy fight where their advantages disappear. Use terrain as a force multiplier. Turn apparent weakness into strength by choosing your battlefield. The numbers debate continues among historians. Were there really 300 defenders or 3,000? Did 10,000 Muslims die or 100,000? But focusing on exact figures misses the point. What matters is the ratio, a tiny force defeating a massive one through intelligent use of geography. Whether 1 to 33 or 1 to 333, the principle remains: terrain can trump numbers. This is where legend and history collide, and both are true. The legend inspires God fights for the righteous, faith moves mountains. The history teaches, know your ground, use every advantage, make the enemy fight on your terms. Both lessons matter, both shaped 8 centuries of warfare. The philosophical weight of Covadonga transcends military history. When defeat is not an option, when your back is against the wall or deep inside a cave, impossible odds become irrelevant. You fight not to win, but because not fighting means ceasing to exist. That desperation, channeled through perfect terrain, creates miracles that echo through centuries. The human cost haunts any celebration. Victory built on bodies, kingdom built on bones. Tens of thousands died horrible deaths, crushed, drowned, hunted down. The Reconquista that began at Covadonga would claim millions more over 8 centuries. Glory always has a price measured in blood. 300 men in a cave changed history not through strength, but through refusing to kneel. They proved that empires could be stopped, that the impossible was possible, that sometimes the mountains themselves would fight for freedom. Covadonga teaches us that when your back is against the wall, or in this case, deep inside a cave, impossible odds become irrelevant. Sometimes geography is destiny. Sometimes, the rocks remember what men forget, and sometimes, just sometimes, 300 starving men in a cave can change the world forever.